Hi guys. In this little video I want to go over something called workflow, and this is in the develop module, almost like an order of doing different controls and so forth. And we're just going to cover global things in this video. We're not going to get into specifics and local burning and dodging or lightning and darkening or what they call enhancements to individual areas. So we're not going to do that in this video. We're going to go and just cover global enhancements. Adjustments, things that we can do within the development module in Lightroom. So we'll open it up here as soon as it decides to open up. Must be thinking a lot today. And I have pre-selected an image just kind of at random here. I thought it'd be kind of fun to work on this moss-covered thing, one of the ones that I did up on Borestone Mountain. Since I was doing that earlier, I said, let's do some more of these. So we won't go over library module and so forth. We'll go right to the develop module. And we were given the array of different controls we have on the right-hand side here. I'm going to open up the histogram because that really is really important to keep an eye out for areas that are too light or too dark. And I think I have something that's too dark. That's why it's kind of showing up like it is there. Now, what is the order of using all of these global tools here? You know, where do you start? I don't know, but I'm just going to give you my way of doing this, and I have to do it in 12 simple steps. Now, I include a couple more steps when we get into some of these local adjustments. That's what these three guys are right here, and this to a certain extent. But we want to talk about these global adjustments in this little video here. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on this rectangle here and open it up, and what I get is the cropping tool. What's called the cropping tool. Now, I can do all kinds of different things with this. You know, I can make the image bigger, smaller, and so forth, cut it out. I can also straighten it if it's twisted, if there's a house that's twisted. And I can also correct for distortions with alignment, say like keystoning images and so forth. It does a pretty good job with that. Now let me set this back to 0 here, so we won't have to worry about it. Now I'm going to over here. I have a little lock, and if I keep that locked, I can keep what's called the aspect ratio locked. So if I cropped smaller or bigger, it will keep the same relationship of width to height. Say I wanted to crop that much, you know, and I could come up here and I just kind of drag around my image and say, yeah, let's take a look at that. Look at those three roots, the way they kind of hang in there. So if I double click there, I cropped right down to it. Oh, by the way, there's that clipped area right in there, you can see. But if I don't like it, I say, what the heck was I doing? It's awfully tight on those roots. Let's open that back up again, and oh, look, you know, I can just essentially expand this to be the same size as my image, and no harm done. As a matter of fact, I don't think I really need to crop this that much or to straighten it. So the next thing I would do, given all of this here, I would come down to camera calibration, open that up, and see what I've got going on here. Adobe Standard. Now I mentioned before that I have a special device that creates color profiles for different lighting situations when I photographed it here. And that's what all of these are down here. But I'll pretend I'm not going to use that today because I'm going to show you how to work on your own computers at home. You might want to buy that device. I'm not here to sell you anything. But anyway, Adobe Standard is probably the best one to use. But I'll show you what else these look like. Let's go to, say, Camera Landscape. You can see a slight different change in hue. Here's a neutral one here, they say. It seems a little dull. Adobe Standard seems to be the best color range there, and we talked about using the process here. Now, I also mentioned if you're shooting JPEGs, you don't have any of these options. It will say embedded, and that's that. But again, I have a digital negative file that I'm working on here. So I'll close that up. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to lens corrections and open that up. And I'm going to enable the lens corrections. And I can see that this has already come up here. I might have had to dial in the proper manufacturer and the model of the lens and so forth. I also can do this manually down here if I have to, custom and so forth. But fortunately, they have quite a few of the lenses on file. Now, watch what happens when you click this on and off. See, this is something that you don't notice until you turn it on. And notice how the lighting changes, too, as I enable it. Well, what happens is with a lens, you get more illumination in the center and less on the edges. So when you click on this enable, it evens the illumination as well as flattening out the image so it fits better, better rendition on 2 dimensions and so forth. So after this, I'm going to close this up as I go just to keep some space saved here. After this, I'm going to go up and open up the basic. The basic is where you're going to do an awful lot of work. An awful lot of work. Probably most of your time spent here is spent up in basic. And the first thing I'm going to work with is my exposure and contrast right here. Exposure and contrast right here. Now they're set at 0 when you open up, and it's simply more is brighter, the left is less, so forth. And watch and see the clipping that's showing up there. So that's a problem. So I'll have to assess that problem or figure out a way of getting around that now. Gee, I wish my color monkey would go to sleep on me. Thank you very much. So let's see. So what happens is it? How about if I lower my contrast? So that's kind of nice, but my shadows are kind of getting dark there too as a result of that. But it kind of makes it a little bit richer. How about if does it need contrast? That seems to be helping it out quite a bit. But notice that when I changed my exposure down a little bit. When I change my exposure down a little bit, the blacks get so black. Well, if I come down here to this black slider and slide it to the right, I get rid of the clipping that's happening in that shadow right there. So I actually have detail in there. So what these are general controls up here. And then you can get down into sort of specific areas with highlights, shadows, and so forth here. So let's see what happens when I bring the highlight up. Nah, I don't particularly like that too much. I kind of like this image on the dark side here, actually, to tell you the truth. Kind of feels a little bit better to have it, for me anyway, to have it a little bit on the dark side down there. Let's see what it was when I started. Now, to do that, if I press the backslash button on the keyboard, that's what I was when I started. Sorry about all the all the clipping showing there. Let me turn that off. No, it won't let me turn it off. So there it is. So we've come quite a ways with this image so far. Let's see. The shadows. Shadows aren't too bad. The blacks. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to work with the tone curve, which is right here. Now the tone curve is kind of like a different way of parsing up these 4 different sliders here. See, they have the same names, and they each relate to a different portion of the curve here. What's different with the tone curve that you might like to do is it has a little shortcut thing. See this little guy up here in the upper left? You click on that, and if I come over to an area that I would like darker, say, if I hold down on the mouse on that area and drag it down, I will be darker. See what's happening on the curve? Ooh, look at that. Now if I come to an area that I want lighter, we'll come over here on this lighter portion of the moss and push it up. I can start to get a little contrast. And I'll turn it on and off to show you some difference there. Okay, there's on and off. So we'll open it back up, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to go back in here, and I kind of liked what was happening in that shadow as I pulled that down. Not too bad. Okay, so there's this tone curve. Just added a little bit of contrast down in the shadow there. See how I like that. There's another control down here, this HSL here, which I might want to work with in this particular image. I would say I'm going to work with luminance, or maybe saturation. Yeah, saturation may be kind of fun. And what we'll do is we'll come over here to this area here. Come on, there we go. And we'll use that same scenario. We've got one of those little guys up on the left. I clicked on it. Now I'm going to kind of increase the saturation on the moss a little bit. Maybe a little too much, eh? And see how the yellow's coming up and the green's increasing, that kind of thing. Okay, that's about all you really want to do with that. Luminance. Let's see what we get with luminance here. That might be kind of fun. Well, we know it's green and yellow, so I can actually work with the sliders over here. So if I darken the yellow slightly, darken that green slightly, I'm getting some nice richness in there. Check that out. Not too bad. Let me turn it on and off. I'll show you what I mean. Here's off, on. So it's off and on. So it added quite a nice kind of rich color, so forth, happening in that image. That's kind of nice to see. Next thing I'm going to do is work with presence right here. And what this is, these are sliders that will kind of sharpen things. Now if I bring this over here, and you'll see how much sharper. See if I bring it down here, it almost looks like looking through dirty glasses here. But if I come over here and give it a little bit of extra sharpness, that's kind of nice. Maybe vibrance, saturation if I want to make the image grayscale, But we don't want to oversaturate it. That's a little cartoon-like, like a bad comic book. But I do like a little bit of color, especially with this green, you know, to kind of enhance that green kind of shot that's going on there. Boy, I tell you. Now, one thing I hadn't worked on yet, and we'll come up here and take a look at it, and that is the color balance up at the top here. Well, I can either use one of these presets over here. There's automatic. Yuck. There's daylight. There's cloudy. There's as shot, which is I had daylight set in the camera. Or I can use this eyedropper over here. Watch this. I'll click on the eyedropper, and if I come over here to the image, if I have something that's gray or fairly middle gray, a neutral value, I think right on that tree root right about there, I'm guessing, be pretty gray. And I can tell by looking at my target. If I click on that, I can probably get a color balance or a white balance that's closer to the actual color of the scene itself without enhancing it or without altering it too much. So what I could have done, which I didn't do here, was photograph a gray target right in the scene and then use that to adjust my color to set my color balance to. So that's quite nice. That's pretty neat that's going on there. So forth. Let's look at a before. Let's look at an after. If you can look around all the blackness there. I don't know if we can do this without it now. So down here, the other thing we want to work with now is something called detail, and that's where we reduce noise if there's any sort of digital noise, and also sharpen the image slightly to make it a little bit sharper. Now here we go. We always do noise reduction first, and you really have to enlarge the image substantially in order to see any noise that might be going on here. Now you see it's hard to navigate around here. Here's a little tip. If I go up to this thing called the navigator up here in the upper left, open that up, and I have a little window that I can move around. It's a little faster. So noise is going to show up in the shadow, and I don't really see much. But we'll go down here to the noise reduction. I'm going to bring it up to, say, maybe about 50. It probably won't change a thing in the image. If you have a photograph that's very, very noisy, a file that's very noisy, and you have to use a lot of noise removal, what you're going to do is end up softening the image. That's kind of what noise does. You know, it softens the grain or softens all of that digital noise so that it's not seen. And unfortunately, it does it at the expense of the sharpness of the image. So we can keep the contrast up a little bit if we prevent that from falling back too much. Keep our luminance for our noise reduction right around 50% for this image. Really doesn't need much. Now, sharpening. So I'm going to come up here to let's see, which part should we want to see the sharpening. What would that show up really well? I think right in there it'll show up well. So here we are in the sharpening end of things. Let me bring that up to a whole bunch so you can see where it's over sharpened, a little too photoshopped looking, correct? Am I right? Right. So sharpening, I'm a pretty judicious kind of sharpener myself. I don't use a lot of sharpening. So what do you do? I usually use about 75%, something like that. And this is actually input sharpening. So when you go into Photoshop, when I really work on images, I do sharpening at 3 different points. Now down here in the radius, there's a cool little trick. If you press on the Option key or the Alt key, if you get a PC, and you press on the button, I can see the edges of things a little bit better. Remember, sharpening sharpens the edges. So you can see that the radius is the edge tool right here. If we go too much, it's a little over the top. If we go too little, it's really not doing enough. So I usually leave mine right around 8 to 12, 8 to 1.2, something like that. Now let's put this at 9, something like that. And remember, we're looking at this image blown up quite a bit over here. Now detail is the same thing. If I hold down on my Option key or your Alt key, if you have a PC, and this way I can preserve some of the details that might get blurred. Now here's a weird one, masking down here. What this does is prevent areas from being sharpened. Sounds odd, but let's go back. We'll fit the image into the frame here. With the masking, if I press down on the Option key and move my masking over here to the right, anything that's black will not get sharpened. So you can see I don't want to sharpen the shadows here or any sort of noise that's in there. So I can kind of control my amount of sharpening a little bit more by doing that. Now I'm almost done. I might want to add a little bit of effects around the edge, and what this is called post-crop vignetting, or I call darkening the edges. So you can have this set for different areas. I'll overdo it so you can see what it's doing here. So I'm just going to kind of slightly, ever so slightly, darken the edges just a little bit on this image here. There's one other thing that I could do, but I really don't need to do it here, and that is remove spots. And that's what this little guy is right here. You know, if I had spots that showed up on the image, maybe from a dirty sensor or things that show up in the sky and something blurs or something, I can actually blend them out by using the spot removal tool here. And remember, I mentioned before, this is for red eye. You know, when you've used a flash or something in front of somebody's eyes, they might tend to be a little on the red side. So here's a little before. Here's a little after. Before, after. I think it's a little improvement myself. A little richer print. The green is greener. And there you go. So we go back to the library. Then if I wanted to export that for the assignment, I could do it. And more later. Thanks.